Welcome to Deep Night Whispers, where the quietest stories echo the loudest in the dark. If you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe. New stories arrive every week, and everyone carries a truth that lingers long after the telling. Tonight, we travel to France, to a story that still haunts the pages of history. A story not of monsters from legend, but of two sisters, ordinary, quiet, invisible, who, one winter evening, unleashed a horror so violent that the world could not look away. This is not a tale of sudden madness. It is the slow unravelling of two souls shaped by cruelty, pressed by silence, and bound together so tightly that, in the end, they became one. It was February 1933 in the city of Le Mans. The streets were cold, slick with rain, and the evening light had already begun to fade behind the cathedral roofs. Inside a house on Rue Brière, a woman named Madame Léonie Lancelin was returning home from an evening out. She was supposed to find her daughter Geneviève waiting at the door, but the lights inside were off. The air still, and somewhere in that darkness, something unspeakable waited. When the neighbours arrived later that night, they found the front door locked from the inside. The only light came from a candle flickering in an upstairs window. Police forced their way in. What they found inside would burn its way into France's collective memory. In the narrow hallway, they found the body of Madame Lancelin, crumpled at the foot of the stairs. Beside her lay her daughter. Both women were nearly unrecognisable, their faces gone, their bodies brutalised beyond comprehension. The crime was so violent that even the most hardened officers looked away. And when the search led them upstairs, they found something even stranger. Behind a locked door, huddled together on a single bed, were Christine and Léa Papin, the family's live-in maids. They weren't screaming. They weren't crying. They were quiet, as if the storm outside had nothing to do with them. They were naked, wrapped in each other's arms, trembling though not entirely from fear. On the floor beside them lay a hammer, a kitchen knife, and a pewter pitcher, all of it coated in blood. The police didn't know what to think. The sisters confessed almost immediately, but their calm, their emptiness was more terrifying than any denial could have been. They said they had acted in self-defense, that Madame and her daughter had attacked them, that something had snapped. But as investigators began to unravel the story, what emerged was something far more disturbing. A slow decay of sanity born not in that single night, but in years of silence and devotion that preceded it. Christine and Léa Papin were not criminals in the beginning. They were servants, quiet, obedient, and unseen, as all good servants were expected to be. Christine, the elder, was strong-willed, serious, disciplined. Léa, 3 years younger, was gentle and shy, often following her sister's lead. They were born into poverty, in a countryside where children were currency and affection was scarce. Their father Gustave was violent and often drunk. Their mother Clémence was cold, distant, the kind of woman who measured love by obedience. When the marriage fell apart, the children were scattered, but Christine was sent to a convent. Léa was sent to live with relatives. And for both of them, the message was clear. Love was something that could be taken away at any moment. Years later, they reunited as adults. Both became maids, one of the few paths available to poor young women in 1920s France. They found work with the Lancelin family, who were wealthy, respected, and entirely unaware of the quiet storm they had invited into their home. At first, things went well. The sisters worked tirelessly, cooking, cleaning, sewing, maintaining every detail of the household. Madame Lancelin was known to be strict but fair. But something began to change. Christine, the elder sister, grew possessive, protective, almost to the point of obsession. She refused to let Léa out of her sight. They spoke only to each other, often in whispers, as if sharing secrets no one else could hear. At night they shared a bed. The family thought it strange but harmless. They couldn't have known how deep that bond ran. And then, one day, a small thing broke the balance. A minor scolding, a flicker of anger, a moment so ordinary that no one could have known it would ignite the kindling of something far older, something buried deep in years of humiliation and silence. By that winter, the sisters had become shadows in the house, isolated, inward, and trembling under the surface of their calm. What happened next would turn that silence into violence beyond reason. ChatGPT said, "Perfect. Here's part 2 of your 25-minute cinematic script, continuing in your Deep Night Whispers tone, quiet, immersive, and psychological." We move now from the calm before the storm into the slow, tragic unravelling of the Papin sisters' world. The Papin Sisters Part 2, Deep Night Whispers Edition. The days before the murders were unremarkable. Outside, Le Mans carried on with its winter routine market stalls, church bells, the slow rhythm of small city life. Inside the Lancelin home, the sisters followed the same pattern they always had. Early mornings, silent chores, each task performed with mechanical perfection. But something had changed in the air. Madame Lancelin's temper had grown sharper, her patience shorter. There were rumours she had become suspicious that she thought the sisters too close, too strange. She had begun inspecting their work, running her fingers along shelves for dust, checking the linen for stains, finding fault in the smallest of things. Each criticism cut deeper than it should have. Christine endured it with tight lips, but Léa trembled under her breath. And each time Christine whispered, "Don't cry. They can't touch us." Their world had shrunk to a fragile circle, 2 sisters and their silence. Everything outside of that was threat. On February 2nd, 1933, it was raining again. Geneviève Lancelin, the daughter, had gone into town with her mother. The sisters were alone in the house, cleaning as usual. Around 6 in the evening, the power failed. A blown fuse, a minor thing, easily fixed, but it was the spark that would light the match. Christine had taken a repaired iron to the upper floor. When she plugged it in, the fuse snapped again, throwing the house into shadow. Frightened, she went downstairs to tell Madame Lancelin when she returned. But by the time the women came home, the darkness in that house was more than electrical. Madame Lancelin entered first, irritated by the outage, followed by Geneviève carrying parcels. Christine explained what had happened, calm, respectful, but Madame Lancelin's anger flared. She accused Christine of negligence, of carelessness, of wasting money on repairs. The words hit like stones. For years the sisters had endured rebuke in silence. This time, something cracked. Christine turned to Léa. Something in her eyes changed an expression Léa had never seen before. Later in court, Léa would say it was as if her sister were no longer human. Christine moved first. In a flash of motion, she lunged at Geneviève, seizing her by the hair and striking her face with the heavy iron she still held. The blow split skin, drew blood. Geneviève screamed. Madame Lancelin rushed forward, but Léa, timid, trembling, Léa stepped between them. She grabbed Madame Lancelin's arms, holding her fast while Christine struck again and again. The scene turned frantic, then silent. The only sound was the iron hitting flesh, the dull rhythm of a century of pain finding its voice. When the iron finally slipped from Christine's hand, the 2 women lay motionless on the floor. Blood pooled beneath them, running into the carpet like spilled ink. But it wasn't over. The sisters stood panting, faces blank, hands shaking. Then Christine said, almost gently, "We must finish it." They fetched a kitchen knife, a pewter pitcher and a hammer. No one knows exactly how long it lasted, 5 minutes, 10, an eternity, but by the end the mother and daughter were no longer recognizable. Eyes torn out, faces destroyed, the house echoing with silence once more. Afterward, the sisters washed their hands, locked the front door and climbed the stairs. They removed their blood-stained clothes and folded them neatly in a corner. Then they lay down together in bed. No attempt to flee, no effort to hide. They simply waited. Hours later, when the police arrived and forced open the door, they found the sisters just as the candles had burned low, entwined, shivering, whispering prayers that made no sense. When asked why they had done it, Christine answered in a voice devoid of emotion. It was her fault. No one ever clarified who her was, the mother, the daughter, or something inside Christine herself. At the police station, their calm unnerved everyone. Léa followed Christine's every movement, every word. When officers tried to separate them for questioning, Christine screamed not words but sounds, raw and animal. She clawed at the air, begging to see her sister. Even when restrained, she cried out, "It's Léa or nothing, and if you take her, I'll die." Psychiatrists would later describe it as shared psychosis, folie à deux, a condition where one mind dominates another, until the two become inseparable. But what no one could answer was how it had begun. In prison, Christine's obsession deepened. She refused food, refused sleep, begged to be allowed to see Léa. When the guards denied her, she tore at her clothes and beat her head against the wall. Her screams echoed through the corridors night after night. Finally, authorities relented just once. The reunion was brief, but it chilled every witness present. Christine collapsed in Léa's arms, murmuring, "It's my fault, my little one. They'll never understand." Then she looked into Léa's eyes and said something no one forgot. "We are one soul in two bodies." When the news broke, it swept through France like a fever. Two quiet maidservants, invisible women, had slaughtered their wealthy employers with unimaginable brutality. The newspapers devoured it. Headlines screamed, "Monsters in the household! A family's servants turned beasts." But behind the sensational ink, something deeper stirred. This was 1933, a France divided by class and fear. The Depression had hollowed out the middle class, and resentment simmered between those who served and those who ruled. The Papin case became more than a crime. It became a mirror one that reflected the darkness beneath France's polished surface. The sisters were placed in separate cells to await trial. Christine's mental state deteriorated quickly. She refused to eat unless Léa did. She spoke to her through the walls, whispering softly into the cold stone. When guards silenced her, she banged her head against the floor until she bled. Doctors tried to calm her with sedatives, but even in the haze, she repeated one phrase over and over, "It was our destiny." Meanwhile, Léa, the younger, quieter sister, retreated into herself. She hardly spoke, only nodding when addressed. When asked why she had joined her sister in the attack, she gave a single answer. "Whatever Christine does, I do too." It was devotion beyond reason, and it frightened everyone who saw it. The trial began that September. Crowds lined the streets outside the courthouse, their breath forming mist in the autumn air. Inside, the sisters stood side by side, dressed in simple black, pale and thin from months of confinement. They did not look like murderers. They looked like lost children. When the charges were read, Christine bowed her head. Léa stared at the floor. The prosecutor described every wound, every act of cruelty, his voice steady and detached. The courtroom fell silent as he listed the damage done to the victims' bodies. Even seasoned reporters averted their eyes. Christine showed no reaction. Only once did she break the silence when the court ordered that she and Léa be held apart. She screamed. It took 3 guards to restrain her. Experts debated whether they were mad or simply evil. Psychiatrists, philosophers, even poets attended the proceedings. The intellectual elite saw in the sisters' case something symbolic, a rebellion of the oppressed against their masters, or perhaps the tragic collapse of 2 souls suffocated by servitude. But in the end, the court saw none of that. It saw 2 killers. On September 29, 1933, the verdict was read. Christine Papin was sentenced to death by guillotine. Léa, whose involvement was considered secondary, was given 10 years of hard labour. The room fell silent. For a moment, Christine did not move. Then she turned to her sister and whispered, "We'll meet again soon." Her calm terrified everyone who heard it. Appeals followed, arguments over Christine's sanity, and eventually her sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. But the damage was done. By the time she was transferred to a psychiatric hospital, she was barely recognisable. Nurses described her as detached, catatonic, a woman who spoke in whispers to invisible company. Sometimes she laughed softly for no reason. Sometimes she sat motionless for hours, eyes fixed on a corner no one else could see. When she was finally allowed a visit from Léa, she clung to her and wept. But after a few minutes, something in her broke. She began clawing at her own body, shouting that she wanted to join her sister's soul. The visit was ended, and the two never met again. Christine withered slowly in that asylum. By 1941, 8 years after the crime, she stopped eating. She told her doctors she was already dead, and in a way she was. Her body was found curled in her bed, her face peaceful, as if she'd finally returned to the silence she'd always known. Léa's story took a quieter path. After serving 8 years of her 10-year sentence, she was released for good behaviour. She found work as a housekeeper under an assumed name, a cruel echo of the life that had destroyed her. Neighbours later described her as quiet, polite, solitary. She avoided conversation and kept her curtains drawn. She never married, and she never spoke her sister's name again. When she died in 2001, at the age of 89, few people even knew who she was. Her grave bears no inscription, no mention of what she had done or what she had survived. But the story of Christine and Léa did not die with them. Writers, filmmakers and psychologists have returned to it again and again, trying to understand what turned two gentle women into murderers. Some called it madness. Some called it oppression. Others called it love so complete it became destruction. Perhaps it was all of those things. Perhaps it was something else entirely, a quiet growing darkness that no one noticed until it burst through the surface. There's one more detail, one that most retellings leave out. When police first entered the Unsettling home, they found a single candle burning beside the bodies. Its wax had nearly melted away. And yet, in that dim light, the walls seemed to flicker as if the shadows themselves were alive. Maybe it was just the candle's flame. Or maybe, even in death, the house remembered. This story of love, servitude and madness remains one of the most haunting in history. Not because of what the sisters did, but because of how quietly the world created them. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you. You've been listening to Deep Night Whispers, where every story carries a truth hidden beneath the quiet. If you want to hear more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and let the darkness keep you company just a little longer.